Great. So welcome everyone to the Finchley Pollinator Project's webinar about the wonder of soil science, hosted by the one and only amazing horticulturist Deena J. Kestenbaum. I'm Shiri Atzmon. I'm very much involved with this project. And this webinar is part of our spring/summer initiative, which we call Buzz Tops. Our main goal is to encourage people in Finchley and beyond to add a bus stop to your balcony, to your driveway, to your garden. It can be a planter, it can be a little piece of your garden, as long as it is full with plants that make pollinators happy. We usually share the list of plants in our newsletters, but they're very easy to Google. And if you're not too sure, you can always look at the label of any plants that you want to buy. It's not always accurate, but if there is a picture of a bee, usually it means that it is good for pollinators. Again, it's not exact science. We also have more exciting webinars coming up. I will make sure to include these in my follow-up email. And we even have 3 in-person events happening this summer. We have one in May and 2 in June coming up. So we will be in touch about all of that. And without much ado, let me just give the scene to Deena, and I will also share my screen with all the content. So just give me 1 minute to do that.
Delightful. So I am going to give a little piece of, well, it's not housekeeping, it's a bit of an advance warning in the sense that it is possible that my son who lives overseas might turn up. I mean, he's en route. And if he shows up in the next hour, my 3 dogs are going to go into the outer reaches of hysterics because they love him, at which point I will slam the door closed. So if you hear a great cacophony of barking and a door slamming, just breathe in and out, and then I'll be back and we can talk more about this amazing subject, soil science. And I'd really like to thank Shiri for the opportunity to talk about a subject that I absolutely love. And I hope by the end of this hour together, even if you don't remember any of the details that I've been sharing with you, and there are going to be a lot of details, if you just come away from this hour with a sense of awe and wonder at the complexity of a medium that many of us don't really think much about, and that is soil, the soil beneath our feet. It is everywhere. Perhaps some of us only notice it when it's annoying and gets onto the bottom of our shoes and tracks mud through the house. If it's slippy, if it's sandy and you get sand in your socks and your shoes, and then you notice it. I think many of us really don't give a great deal of thought about a medium that is abounds with life. And this first slide gives you a kind of screenshot of some of the creatures that exist underneath that 6 inches of soil that we might be aware of, because that's where we're planting in, or even if you're not somebody who plants, you might be aware of the first 1 inch of soil that is supporting plants that you may notice. But the astonishing numbers of insects. Sorry, is somebody talking to me? No? Okay.
No, it was me. I realized I wasn't on mute. Apologies.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So you have a just an unimaginable number, and I'm talking about millions into the billions of microorganisms that are existing in the soil in this very complex interrelationship, a symbiosis that ends up with a material that supports all of life. Because if we don't have fertile soil, life comes to an end. We don't eat. And really, it is as simple as that. The other thing that is kind of a bit of a mind-blowing consideration is the amount of time that it takes to get from the so-called raw ingredient, which are solid rocks, and there are different kinds of rocks that I will talk about in a minute, that then goes through this long, intricate, continuously ongoing process that ends up with something that you can pick up in your hand, that is looks like compost, that you can plant in, that, to use a word I absolutely love, friable, which means that consistency that you get if you've mixed flour and butter together, that kind of breadcrumby consistency. So this is something that it's dynamic, it's complicated, and it is vital to all terrestrial ecosystems. It's the home of life, and it is where life gives us more life. So before I go into the science of it, I think I would just like to remind all of us, this is something that goes almost unnoticed, unconsidered, but actually we need to nurture it, we need to care for it, we need to respect the soil, because in not doing so, we end up with impoverished, barren, poor soil that cannot support plants. And we are dependent, even if we're not eating the plants directly in the forms of vegetables, we are dependent on the animals that are eating the plants that are then feeding us. So where does soil come from? If you could go to the next image, actually, please. This is an amazing, it's an enlargement of a tiny section of soil. And these images that are in green and kind of turquoise are the massively enlarged bacteria. Now, there are something like, I think it's something like 2 million bacteria, and I might be wrong there, might be more, in 1 teaspoon of soil. So bacteria is teeming there, and it is the bacteria that we want to encourage. It's not pathogens that are going to make us sick. It's the bacteria that are kind of almost the basic building blocks of what will eventually become soil. And these tiny little web-like strands that you see are hugely enlarged. They are the root of fungi that are living under the soil, and I'll talk about this more later. But again, absolutely fundamental to soil health. So this now raises the question, where on earth does soil come from? And if we could go to the next image, please, Shiri. Just if we go to just pictures. Yeah, okay. Can everyone see that? Is that large enough? Okay, so you can see, even if you can't, you don't need to be able to see the writing, but what you can see is that you start off with bedrock, with rock. That's in the first image. The soil begins to form. And there are different kinds of rock. I don't want to turn this into a massive geology lecture, mainly because I'm not a geologist, so I don't think I could really talk very intelligently about it beyond what I can tell you right now. So we've got igneous rock, which is magma or lava, the cool volcanic material that is hugely fertile. So communities who risk living at the foothills of active volcanoes, they do take their life in their hands, but until it erupts, they are able to grow crops at a tremendous rate because the soil is so incredibly fertile. You then have got sedimentary rock, which is formed from the compression of eroded rocks and shells and minerals. And that erosion comes from weathering. So if you are, for example, walking kind of away from the shore along the cliff face of a beach, you probably will notice that there is almost a continuous kind of sprinkling down of what was rock material and is in front of your eyes turning into sand. And that is from weathering. That is a combination of salt in the atmosphere, of rain, of the fact that there is very often not enough plant life on top of the rock face, the cliff face, the surface that is holding, that is binding together the soil particles. And so the wind will then just blow it away. And you can see it happening in front of your face. And then you have metamorphic rock, which is pressure and the heat and cooling that you have through weather conditions that causes contraction and expansion in rocks that then starts to create little cracks. And you can see in the second and third and last picture that the rock face, the rock material is beginning to break down more and more and more and more and more. And essentially, this is the basis of soil, is mineral particles that are from weathered rock that are collecting over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So it's a long process, which is another reason why perhaps, we need to think a little bit more carefully before you just take off, let's say, the surface of a front garden to pave it for your cars. And I don't want to say, I'm not making any judgment here, but what I am saying is just dedicate some thought to what you're getting rid of has taken thousands of years to arrive there. And then if you do whatever you want to do. But if you think about the fact that, the Earth's mountains and stuff were created billions of years ago, and humanity is here just a number of thousands or tens of thousands of years, there is a kind of there's a sort of humbling, I think, a sense of humility that we're fairly new in relation to these really complex natural environmental processes that have been going on. So if we could go to the next image, please. Okay, so this is a kind of adorable picture. Talking about the soil humus. So you can see kind of little worm-like creatures there, organic matter, bacteria, these rather kind of coronavirus-looking images here suggesting all different kinds of bacteria. Living organisms are in the soil, fungi, bacteria, insects, nematodes, which are little worm-like creatures that are so small that you actually can't see them with the naked eye, protozoa, which are single-celled creatures that live in the soil. So that is part of the component of the soil. You have water that both percolates up and down, and that is helping to disintegrate the larger lumps of rock that are sitting in the soil. You've got air pockets that are coming through the soil, which is thanks to the activity of worms, beetles, spiders even, and a whole host of creatures that are so tiny, unless somebody tells you about it, you would never find them with your naked eye. So the specific mineral components that form the building blocks of soil range in size from coarse sand to gravel to fine silt, which is what you would find around rivers, and clay particles. I mean, I'm sure anybody who has stuck a spade into the soil is aware of the fact that London, except for actually strangely, this band of sand that runs across the heath. I'm kind of turning to the left because that's the direction I would go to get to the heath. It's predominantly clay. Within the soil as well, you have got slugs, you've got millipedes, you've got woodlice, and a host of other insects that are stirring up the soil. It's a very, very dynamic medium. You know, what we see looks kind of static and unmoving. But if any of you have ever put your spade into a compost heap and lifted it up, you will see that there is a gigantic amount of life that is in there. It's kind of surprising because not that much of it is visible on the surface of the soil. So you have got all these creatures that are chewing up dead plants, fungi and bacteria that are breaking down dead matter, that are feeding. It's also a kind of a food pyramid, that the soil is kind of the bottom of the food pyramid. So you've got all the larger creatures that are eating each other. But once you get to birds and to the smaller mammals, excuse me a minute. You've got you've got a lot of carnivorous activity going on in the soil. Oh, excuse me, I'm just going to get some water. Oh. Okay, I'm sorry about that. And Shiri, you might want to edit that out. So you have a lot of carnivorous activity, and with all of the dead bodies that are mounting up of ants, of millipedes, of slugs, as their bodies are decomposing, they are distributing into the soil a lot of the chemicals that plants depend on. So specifically, that is nitrogen, that is phosphorus, and nitrogen, phosphorus, and the other one escapes me, but it will come back in a minute. And this again is adding up to create an incredibly fertile environment that we call humus. It's kind of always funny, isn't it, to see that written and think about hummus and humus. But anyways, I've been doing this for years and it's still kind of potassium. Yes, thank you so much. That was from Taron. Thank you very much for fixing that little brain freeze moment. So the spaces that all of these creatures are creating in the soil are allowing water and air to get through the soil. Water is transporting nutrients that is essential for plant growth. Air is providing, within air, when you break it, you know, the chemical compounds down, that is providing oxygen for plant roots and soil organisms. Depending on what kind of soil one is working with, which of course then depends entirely on the bedrock, that will create the pores that are either larger or smaller, allowing either more or less air and water to get through. So if you take a sandy soil, if you are gardening or growing in areas, coastal areas, where you've got really tiny particles, where that bedrock has been broken down into weeny, teeny little particles, which allow water to percolate through very fast. It's terrific for carrots. Carrots like very sandy soils. It's not going to be good for something like a potato that really does very well in heavy soils that are more waterlogged, that hold more air and more water. And as an aside, if I'm talking as a gardener, you have to go with what you've got. I mean, you're never going to be able to change the structure with which you are working. So if we could go into the next slide, please. So this is what I was talking about earlier, is this really complex soil food web where you've got animals and birds that are feeding on kind of arthropods, that's the whole spider, springtail family, nematodes and worms. Those are in turn feeding on single cell protozoa and fungi and bacteria, and down and down and down and down it goes. And you really, in order to have a healthy metasphere, you have got to start with the microcosm of the very, very basic building blocks. If you don't take care of that, and that's in any situation, you don't have good foundations on a house, your house is going to fall down. I mean, you don't start with good material and you're trying to make a piece of clothing, the outcome is going to be poor because you're not starting with good material. So I think that at this point, it's interesting to think about how interconnected everything is. And that if you take out one section of this very complex web, so whether you're using pesticides that will then destroy all pests, or if that's how, if you're using pesticides, you'll see insects and caterpillars and stuff as pests. You are actually then taking out the food source for birds, and up the chain it goes, but also down the chain it goes, so that you have got that nematodes that are depending on the breakdown of the arthropods' bodies to feed on, they're not there anymore. So that again is something to think about when, in terms of, and I'm really not going into massive mono agriculture and agrochemicals, because we as individuals might find it difficult to influence that. But I am talking to you as people who may have a window box, and how are you going to care for that window box? And if you are spraying what you're growing in there with herbicides that will kill weeds, or pesticides that will kill pests, it's something to consider what the knock-on effect is. For every action, there is a reaction. Okay, so can we go to the next slide, please? And the next one, please. Next one. Okay, so this is the one before. If we could go to the one before, Shiri. There was one about the different kinds of structures of okay, let's go on to soil structure. So we talked a little bit about soil structure. We'll get there in the end. And again. And again. Yay, here we go. Okay, this is a bit of a double act that maybe needs a little bit of improvement, but isn't bad as we stand. So I was talking about sand, silt, and clay, and you can see the different kinds of particle sizes from the photograph, which is enormously, this is 10 times, the first one, sand, is 10 times enlarged. And by the time you get to clay, it's 1,000 times enlarged, so that the pores of clay are actually much bigger than the ones of sand and silt, on sand and clay. The best kind of soil is actually silt. It's like all things in life. It's the middle path, apparently middle of the road. That is what we're all aiming for. If we could go on to the next one, please, Shiri. Yeah, we can go on to the next. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about mycelium, and that is that we saw it in the first image of the enlarged bacteria, and I said that those white lines are the roots of fungus. So when I talk about a fungus, I think maybe some of us might be more familiar with the term mushroom. Mushroom is a kind of fungus, and you see them popping up above ground, generally in the autumn, in wet autumn, often around tree roots. And what you are seeing above ground is the fruiting body of the fungus. And all this white material down here are the roots that are called mycelium. Now, if anybody is interested in this, I cannot recommend enough. I don't know if you can see this properly, but if you can't, I will just read it to you. It is by a man called Merlin Sheldrake. It's called The Entangled Life, and it is How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. And it's a genius book because he is, he's a botanist and a biologist, but he writes in a manner that anybody with no scientific background at all will find a complete page turner. Like, one of these books that changes the way you relate to the world. And how he describes this web, he calls it the wood wide web. What mycelium is doing, it's actually connecting the roots of plants, particularly trees, but most plants, and is sending into these the plant roots nutrients that it's collected from the soil across a huge amount of space and acreage. They go really, really, really to tremendous distances. And they have a symbiotic relationship with plant life because they have no capacity to photosynthesize. So, mushrooms are brown, right? They don't have any of the green chlorophyll that allows them to produce food via this magical interaction with sunlight and water and carbon dioxide, creating starches that is their food source. So what it is doing is, in exchange for passing nutrients into the roots of plants, it is getting sustenance in the form of starch and sugars from the plant. And it does this by piercing the tiny root hairs of the plant with their even tinier root hairs called hyphae, and then it's like a two-way tube or two-way pipe system where nutrients are going back and forth, supporting both the mycelium and the fungi and the plants. Now, I'm going to just go a little bit again on a digression. The more that is discovered by scientists about the complexity of the soil, the more gardeners, and particularly if you have an allotment, but any kind of gardening activity, people are encouraged to dig less. You may have heard that there is even a whole system, a no-dig system, which I have tried on my, I'm trying on my allotment. It's more complex than just doing nothing. I was very excited when I came across this no dig phenomenon. I thought you just, sit on a chair and throw some seeds around and something is supposed to happen. It's more complicated than that. And maybe that's another conversation that we can have. But every time you slam a spade into all the way up to what's called a spit, which is the entire depth of the spade into the soil, you are cutting through the soil structure. You're cutting through the mycelium, the hyphae, all of the beneficial insects and invertebrates that are living within the soil, and you are wrecking an entire ecosystem that is in the soil. The RHS and other kind of garden guru organizations used to be very enthusiastic about this phenomenon of double digging. So you are digging 2 spits down into the ground twice a year. It does end up with a field or a plot that looks very controlled, very kind of beautiful, but you've destroyed most of the nutrients, which is why you then have to add a ton of fertilizer to reintroduce into the soil everything that you've destroyed. So that if the image of a gardener in the kind of 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and it was always a man, right? Women didn't garden, women just plucked roses and sat about. They're all digging furiously. Really not recommended anymore. So that is good news. Take care of the top 6 inches with humus, with compost, and we can talk about this at the end. Don't give yourself a heart attack digging to the center of the Earth's core. So, what is soil structure? And we can go to the next image, please. Yep, okay. So soil structure is the arrangement of mineral particles, mineral particles, living organisms, organic matter, water, and air within the soil. And the structure will affect the way air percolates through the soil, the movement of water, the transfer of heat, and root growth. Now, the structure of the soil can be improved by adding organic matter, adding compost, right? And compost really is just a breakdown of anything organic, anything that was once living, until it comes down to its kind of lowest common denominator, which becomes this crumbly black substance full of nutrients that you add to the soil. And you can see in this image that the poorly structured soil has not got enough space between the particles so that it becomes compacted, so it becomes waterlogged, so that air doesn't get through, and it becomes anaerobic. In other words, it's almost dead, actually. It doesn't have life in it. And in that environment, it's really difficult for organisms to exist, to live. So you can, if you do inherit poor soil, there is no doubt that with the addition of a lot of organic matter, you can turn it into a fertile environment, growing environment. What cannot be changed, and that is the next image, please, is soil texture. So the soil texture depends entirely on what kind of bedrock is underneath the earth that you're standing on, and that you can't change. So, for example, you have areas of the country that are much more acidic. They are coming from volcanic, sort of more volcanic areas. They are giving rise to more acidic soil, and there are plants that will do incredibly well in acidic soil. So you've got the whole family of camellias, of azaleas, rhododendron do really well there, heathers do really well, pieris. If you're living in London and you are desperate to have those kinds of plants in your garden, they're not really going to thrive in a clay soil. A clay soil is too alkali. So you need to put them into a controlled environment, which is a pot. And then you can put in what's called ericaceous compost, more acidic compost, and your camellia will do great. It won't do great in the soil of a London garden. And bizarrely, as I mentioned before, you do have this incredible display in Kenwood and around the Heath of all those those plants that I was talking about, because you have this there was a sort of geological aberration that happened a billion years ago that just dumped a lot of sandier, loamier, more acidic soil along that strip. And that is why you see this amazing display there year on year. So you can add as much organic matter to the soil as you like, but you are never going to turn a sandy soil into a clay soil. You're not going to be able to turn a clay soil into anything else except a clay soil. What you can do is you can turn it into a very fertile clay soil that will support a very wide range of plants, whether it's ornamentals or edibles. So this final picture is an illustration of how soil formation progresses. And these distinct layers are referred to as horizons, of soil horizons, and they differ in composition, in color, and in texture. So the top layer that you can see that has this cute little plant sitting on the top of what looks like a green carpet is the organic layer. That's the top layer that we are walking on. And this organic top layer is comprised of organisms that are broken down and is very, very rich in nutrients. This is why it's really great to have, that top layer very fertile. So when you're putting your young plants in there that have immature root system, that root system doesn't have to penetrate too far in order to get the nutrients it needs to start it off. As it develops more, the roots will become sturdier. They will be able to penetrate further down. And that's when the relationship with mycelium begins. It's further down in the soil. So the topsoil, right just under the organic matter, you've got horizon A, which is topsoil. Again, very, very fertile. Topsoil is something that you can buy in bags. If you do inherit a garden or outside space that is quite poor in nutrients, you can buy in topsoil. Topsoil is also bought in if you're laying a lawn. The first thing you do is, well, not the first thing, it's one of the last things you do before you lay the soil is lay the turf, is to put a layer of topsoil again, so that those roots right away can feast on a lot of nutrients. And then you've got the horizon underneath, which is called the leaching horizon. This is nutrients leached from O and A horizons. And the leaching of clay, of minerals, of organic matter, with a high concentration of sand and silt particles, is very common in forested areas. It's not that common in agricultural areas, or mainly in back gardens, because again, it requires it being kind of left alone for a long time. And forested areas are able to build up further horizons because there isn't that much disturbance of the soil. And then you get to the subsoil, the substratum, the bedrock, which is the unweathered rock beneath the soil. And this little kind of profile shows you what it looks like as you go further and further down with, you can see the water table there, the groundwater that's also illustrated. That's something that you've got to be aware of if you're living in areas that are prone to flooding, or where the groundwater is quite near the surface of the soil, is not to disturb that, because that causes major problems. So to conclude, and that will give us, let me have a look, yeah, enough time for some questions. The journey from solid rock to fertile soil is long and it's intricate, and it requires an interaction between so many millions of elements that is happening really unseen. It's complex, and it's so important that I hope that if I've given you anything, it is this understanding that we really need to take care of the ground on which we stand and along which we step, because the more that we strip away the soil, and the more that we kind of denigrate it, we are really compromising not only our own lives, our own futures, but those of future generations. But I don't want to leave you with, on a downer. I want you to leave you understanding that all of us have the capacity to take care of this. It's not difficult. You don't need to study. You don't need to have a science degree. All you need to do is not use pesticides, not use herbicides, plant conscientiously, and you're going to be fine. And I will leave it there, and happy to take questions. I hope that this kind of made sense to everybody. And if there are any questions, I would be delighted to try and answer them.
Thank you so much, Deena. I hope everyone agrees. It was very educational, but also quite digestible. I don't feel like overwhelmed, like I need some sort of recovery from a very intense session. It was very awe-inspiring, and really made me think about soil in a different way. And I absolutely love my compost and seeing how it's teeming with life and adding it to different parts of the soil. So thank you so much. We do have a question from Tarun, which is, where do we find mycelium in these soil layers?
So you will find it pretty much in just under the top, in the topsoil, at the bottom of topsoil. The other thing that is really interesting is, I don't know if you've ever bought a bag of compost and opened it up and seen this white stuff in it and wondering, oh my gosh, has it gone off? Is there something wrong with it? It's actually a complete gift and a bonus, because that is mycelium. So that you can see clumps of it. You can't, it's too small to see the individual hyphae, but sometimes when you dig, particularly around the base of a tree, you can find it in clump forms, or in autumn, when the fruiting bodies, the mushrooms are there, then if you sort of just kind of dig with your fingers around the base of it, you can see it then in lumps and clumps.
Fantastic. Audrey has a question.
Yes, thank you. It's very exciting what you've just talked about, the dynamism of soil. Now, the impression I get is that when you said so many organisms are just in a teaspoon, how many organisms do you think have been identified in soil? Or is it still an art that science, it's still an invisible category of science, you know?
That's such an interesting question. Look, I'm not a scientist, but and I think part of being kind of humble about our place in the world is that we don't know everything, right? And there are constantly new discoveries, whether it's at the bottom of the sea or in quite inhospitable areas where suddenly, you know, a new species of something is discovered. Well, it's discovered by people. I mean, they didn't know about it before, but it's been there, you know. It hasn't discovered itself, it knew itself. So I would say that with over the last generation or so, with as microscopes and the ability, you know, nanotechnology has developed so astonishingly, more and more and more microorganisms are being identified. Whether there are more, who knows? I don't know. This is kind of thrilling. Just thinking about all this stuff that you can't see, that you know, as a non-scientist, it's hard to, it's kind of just so huge, it's hard to hold in your head. So I hope that's given you something of an answer.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Deena, I have a question. And this is about store-bought compost. Sometimes I get a bit confused. I make my own compost, but from time to time I do need to buy a bag or two.
Sure.
And I see two things I don't really know what they are. One is a soil improver. And the other thing is that on some of the bags, it says that they have an added John Innes or something like that. And I wonder, who is that John and what did he do to end up in so many compost bags around the UK? What was his sin?
So John Innes was, God, I have to try and remember. There's a whole John Innes Institute. Was he a scientist? I don't remember who he was, but he was a big, and you can check this out, but he was a big mover and shaker in terms of developing chemical additives to soil in order to improve the soil. This was an enormous breakthrough, actually, is to be able to create in a laboratory chemical equivalents of what was found within the natural world. And he was, I think that he was one of the big movers and shakers in this, so that you have John Innes is become a kind of byword for chemically produced kind of additives that will, so that's nitrogen, potassium particularly, and phosphorus, that act on different parts of a plant, whether it's roots, flowers, leaves, to promote healthy growing. And so, for example, with seeds don't need any nutrients at all. It is a completely self-sustaining entity, so that you really don't need to be using nutrient-rich compost to put seeds into. They will take care, they have all of the starch and sugars in them that will take care of their own nutritional needs. The first leaves that pop out have the adorable name called cotyledons, and they are also like little picnic baskets for the plant. And then when the next leaves come out, they start photosynthesizing, the roots start, needing some more nutrients, and that is when you can go onto a recipe called John Innes 2, which is got more nutrients, chemicals in it, and then what you need to put your plants into the soil. A soil improver, this is just simply a kind of advertising, a bit of advertising guff, I would say, because what you actually just need is compost. You don't need soil improver. It's got a basic compost will have everything a soil improver has in it.
Thank you. I can't see any raised hands or questions in the chat.
The only thing that I would add at this point, and I think that actually compost with peat in it is rarer and rarer, because RHS has now embraced the peat-free compost. Peat is a substance that grows on acidic soils specifically. You see it a lot in Ireland, in Scotland, in moorland of Yorkshire. It's nutrient rich. It's very water retentive, and it used to be added in vast quantities to compost until, again, I guess scientists began to realize that actually it supports a very, very specific kind of biodiversity and ecology, and takes tens of thousands of years to develop, and is not a good idea to strip off the land in order to put it into bags of compost. So that's something to be aware of if you're not already. And I think, most reputable places that are selling compost don't sell compost with peat anymore.
Of course, our project from day one, we've always used only peat-free compost because we definitely don't want to take care of one species and destroy a whole ecosystem while doing that. That doesn't make a lot of sense. We're happy to get any more questions or any comments. So there is a question from Simon. So a raised bed has been inherited and has weeds, and been told there's lots of rubble in it.
There's lots of
rubble. And how best not to disturb the land, but to find out what in the soil, and like what's in it. What is
how big is that raised bed?
Feel free to unmute unless you want me to do it for you. I can.
It's about 5.5 meters.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah, it's very, very big, and it's about 1.2 meters deep.
Oh my goodness. And does the soil come all the way to the top?
So this is a problem that we have. Another challenge is that we have a raised bed which is very high and the soil is low. And the soil, and it's also, they've taken out roses as well. They put roses in because they weren't growing vegetables there, and now they've removed it, so now they have disturbed the soil. Plus I've heard there's lots of rubble in there and there's weeds. I don't really know how best to go forward in a nice way.
If you've got a lot of space from where the surface of the soil is to the top of the raised bed, I would just go upward. Don't worry about what's under there.
It's money. We don't have.
This is it. It's expensive, isn't it?
Yeah. £200 worth of compost and plus. We were thinking about doing the German layering.
Yes.
I'm really nervous. I'm too scared to know how to do that in a clever, in the most effective way. And maybe that's something, as you said, to have a session on that, because
it's
quite complex. Getting the right balance.
These things that like no dig. I think it's a bit like, I just started making sourdough, having bread, and having thought, oh my gosh, this is, I've heard that it's really complicated.
Yeah.
You know what it is? It takes time. It's
Yeah.
about time. That's what it is. And trying it.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to have a conversation. Where is this plot, this raised bed?
It's in Golders Green.
Mm.
It's not too far, right? Because maybe we can have our own chat. But
Yeah. But I think
we might do an experiment in one section. And I've bought logs from a tree man recently to do that, to try building up.
The other thing to try is also adding straw and hay to it, you know, to bulk up the compost, and start composting in you know, kind of quite an industrial scale.
Yeah, all before the summer.
Yeah.
So what do you do with the weeds though, if you have lots of weeds? Because I know we're meant to be friendly with weeds, but when they start
just
encroaching,
cut them down and cover it with soil,
mulch?
with plastic. You might want to just start afresh. So cover it with an impermeable, with a permeable, you know, geotextile, and start going up.
Ah, okay. Okay, thank you.
And also Anthea wants to help, and she says sometimes people give away topsoil as long as you're happy to collect. That's true. Thank you, Anthea.
Thank you.
Good. So we are 2 minutes ahead of time. So I can't see any other questions. So I'm going to bid everyone farewell. As I mentioned before, I'm going to send a link to the presentation, and I just want to thank Deena again so much. This was absolutely wonderful, as always. If you guys have, or ladies, have time to catch up on Deena's webinars, they're all on our YouTube channel, and I will send the link again. We have things about pollinators, of course, but a really wide array of topics, and especially if you want to try growing from seed this year or growing from cuttings, we have webinars about all of those topics, thanks to Deena's generosity. So thank you all very much, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure.
Thank you.
It was really interesting, very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.